and good morning to all my lovely students out there. I welcome you all for today's English class. I hope all of you are fit and fine and are in the best of your health, right students? And I hope students you remember what we have done in our previous class. In our previous class we have done the topic of a formal letter writing, right? Wherein we have learned the format of a formal letter writing. Before starting our class, let us recall back what is the format of writing a formal letter. There were 9 points which I have told you in my previous class, students. The first was the sender's address, right? Number 2 was the date. The third one was the recipient's address. The fourth one was the subject. The fifth one was the salutation or greetings. The sixth one was the introduction. The seventh was the body of the letter. The eighth was the closing paragraph, and the ninth point was the signature, that is the name of the person who has written a letter. And I've already mentioned to you what is the difference between a formal letter and an informal letter. Hope this will help you to recall the concept back. And in today's class, students, we are going to do our last topic of the PT1 session, that is story writing. I'm sure many of you like to hear stories, right? And there may be some of you who would even like to write stories. So in today's class, I'll be teaching you some of the important points which you have to keep in your mind while writing a story. Now before starting that, let us see what a story is, how many types of stories are there, and then we will also see the different elements which should be there in a story. So students, what is a story? A story is actually a description of either a real or imaginary series of events, right? Now it can be either a real or an imaginary event. Now when we talk about short stories, there are many types of short stories which we have learned or heard as well when we were kids, and you all also, I think now you are hearing it as a kid, right? Stories of fairy tale stories, and then folk tales, right? Fables, and even science fiction stories, realistic stories. So there are different kind of stories. So I'll be mentioning you the few elements or the few points which you have to keep in your mind while writing the story. So let's start it. The first one is the title. That means your story should have a title. Each and every story which you read has a title, so the title should be appropriate or apt, matching with the story. The second thing is the setting. Setting means what? Setting means the day and the time of happening of the series of action, right? And then whenever we read stories, we find terms like once upon a time, right? And there was a queen living in a particular place. We come to hear of those things. That is called as the setting, which gives the reader an impression of where and when the event is taking place. That is very, very important. The third is the characterization, wherein you must have interesting characters which will help you to write the story. Each and every story have characters. Some stories have real characters like human beings. In some of the stories you even have what you have, animals and even objects wherein they tend to speak, right? Now the main character of a story is called as the protagonist, and the protagonist is like a hero of the story, which leads the story, which faces all the problem and overcomes it. And there is another character called as the antagonist, What is the antagonist, or who is the antagonist? Antagonist is like a villain of the story who creates all the problem for the protagonist or the hero of the story. Okay, and then there are many different types of characters which you will be learning in your higher classes. There are dynamic characters, there are static characters which you would be learning. But a story should always have characters, ample amount of characters around which the story revolves. Okay, and you should introduce interesting characters so as to capture your readers. Then the next point is the plot. Plot is the sequence of action. Okay, what it is the sequence of action of the happening of events. Whenever you describe a story about a child, you don't directly talk about the child going to the college or school. You talk about the birth of the child, no? Where was the child being born, how was the child being reared up, his childhood, then only you will go to the adulthood of the child. So there should be a sequence of action whenever you write a story. Next is the theme. The theme of the story. There's a particular theme on which a story revolves, right? And then after that comes the message. Message is like a moral which the writer wants to give to the readers. Every story has a message to be given to the readers whenever we read a story about anything, right? So whenever we read a story, we come to know about a particular message being given to the readers or to us, and then we tend to understand the story better, and we also try to implement the message which we have got from the story, right? And the last point is the point of view of the author. Point of view means how is the narrator or the writer, if you are writing the story, are you writing the story with the first person, mentioning yourself also in the story? In some of the stories you find that I or we were going to the forest, where the writer or the narrator is including himself or herself also in the story, right? And then narrating the story or writing the story. Whereas in most of the stories they use term of the third person where he, she, it or they are being mentioned. So I hope students all these points will help you to understand how a story should be written. Okay, now let us see an example and try to understand how this element should be there in a story to help you all write creative stories. So students, so far we have seen some of the elements of a story writing. Now let us see a sample. I have taken a very simple story which will help you to understand the different elements which should be there in a story and how a story should be written. Please look it on your screen. The name of the story or the title is The Dove and the Ant, right? So each and every story has a title. Your story cannot be complete without a title. Okay, so please remember that whenever you write a story, your story should have a title. Now let us read the story. A group of ants lived in a hole under a tree near a river. Now this sentence is what, students? It tells us about the when and where of the story, which is the setting which I have mentioned to you, right? Whenever you write a story, don't just directly jump into the action part of the story. First and foremost, you should state the setting of the story. That means when and where the story is taking place. That is the place and time of the story. Like in this particular story, it has been mentioned that they lived where? They lived under a tree near a river. Okay. One day an ant went to the river to drink water. When it was drinking water, it fell into the river and was getting drowned. Now here comes what, students? Here comes the character, right, which I have told you, the ant. So after the setting of the story, you should introduce your characters which are there in the story. Okay, now here we have seen that an ant, that is one of the character of the story, has been already introduced. A dove was sitting on the branch of the tree. She saw the ant drowning. So here another character of the story is being introduced. Like that, what happens, students? You have to introduce the characters one by one in the story. Okay, and as I've told you, the different kinds of characters in a story, but in a short story there are few characters only and only one setting, okay, or one plot. So next, see here, at once the dove plucked a leaf from the tree and threw the leaf near the ant. Now here the main theme which we can see is the story is revolving around a dove and an ant, right? And there is a problem when the dove saw the ant drowning. It is helping the ant and saving the ant from drowning in the river. Then in each and every story, students, you will find a problem. There comes a problem. Like I have mentioned to you the characters, no? Protagonist means like a hero. But then there is an antagonist, or there is a villain in the story who creates all the problem, right? A hero will not become a hero if there is nobody to oppose the hero. So there are some characters in each and every story which creates problem. So whenever you write stories also, there should be some characters which should create problem, so as to engross the readers. The readers will find it very interesting to read your stories, and they would like to read it further to know how the particular protagonist or the main character of the story overcomes the problem. So here we can see that the dove has already saved the ant, and what happens next, which I was talking to you about, that is the plot or the sequence, right? The ant climbed the leaf and then came back to the bank of the river safely. Now what happens? The ant comes back, no? Now the dove has helped the ant has come back safely to the bank of the river. Now this is the sequence. Now here you can see, students, there is a sequence. One by one the events are being connected. Okay. One day a hunter was trying to kill the dove. The ant saw this. So here arises the problem which I was telling you. So the entry of another character where the hunter was trying to kill the dove, right? The ant saw this. It wanted to save the dove, so the ant bit the man. So what happens? Who saw the incident? Now there is an antagonist, or there is a problem maker in the story now. Who is that? That is the hunter who wants to kill the dove. But then the ant saw it, and the ant is very tiny. How will the ant help the dove, right? The ant is very tiny. It wants to save the life of the dove because it had also been saved by the dove, right? It wanted to save the dove, so the ant bit the man. He missed his aim. So what did the ant do here? He bit the man. How many of you have got bitten by an ant? Yes, I too have got bitten by an ant. It's really painful, right? And then here what happens? As the hunter was trying to shoot, aiming at the dove, suddenly he got bit by the ant, and then what happened? His aim did not went straight. He could not aim the dove correctly, and then what happened? He missed the aim. Now here you can see, thus the dove was saved. So here comes the end of the story. But as we read the story, we all got a message, no, from the story. I'm sure by now you all must be thinking, what? There is a message in the story. The message is about what? about helping each other, about helping one another, right? So there's a moral or the message from each and every story. So whenever you write a story, you don't just randomly write a story about anything or everything. You also want to give a message to your readers, right? Now what is the moral? It is also called the moral of the story. Now over there you can see the moral of the story is, if we do good to others, others will also do good to us. So whenever you do good to others, others will also always do good to you. So we should always try to do good to others or help others. And students, the last point which I have told you was the point of view, that is point of view of the writer. Now in this story, the writer has used the third person, where he or she himself is not there in the story, is just a narration of the story. So all these points I hope will help you to write wonderful stories in future. So students, with this we come to the end of our today's class, and I hope you remember all the important points which you have to keep in your mind while writing a story. Let us recall back those points. The first and foremost is that you need to have a title for your story. Okay, the second point was that you have to know the setting, that is the place and time of the story is very, very important. The third point is that you need to have important characters in your story which will engross your readers to read your story. The fourth point is that the plot or the sequence of the story should be systematically written. Okay, not in a haphazard way but in a systematic way, right? And then the next point which I have mentioned to you was that a story always gives us a wonderful message, right? It gives us good morals or message. And last point is the point of view. That means you should think that, are you going to include yourself while writing the story? That means you are going to use the first person, or are you going to simply write it as a third person? That means he, she, it or they you are going to use. Okay, so these are the important points which will help you to write interesting, wonderful stories. I hope today you are going to start writing stories, and please write it, follow these points and write wonderful stories. Okay, so with this we come to the end of our PT1 portion. Stay safe and healthy. I shall see you in my next class, where I will be teaching you about how to prepare for your PT1 exam, and all the important points I'll be sharing with you in our next class. So till then, stay safe and healthy. Bye bye.